Tell me, Ella, are you ready to face the cold, hard truth? Saturn is the Greater Malefic.
Greater Malefic? That sounds dramatic. In modern astrology, Saturn is more about karmic lessons, responsibility, and long-term rewards, not some looming cosmic villain.
Ah, Ella, modern astrologers always try to make Saturn sound like a wise old teacher handing out gold stars for good behavior. But in traditional astrology, Saturn isn't about gentle life lessons. It's about hardship, restriction, and the weight of time itself. There's a reason ancient astrologers feared it.
So you're saying Saturn is just doom and gloom?
Not quite. Saturn is reality, Ella. It's not about making you feel good. It's about survival. It's the cold that tests resilience, the limit that forces discipline, the slow grind that shapes mastery.
All right, I'll play along. If Saturn is really this cosmic force of suffering, how did it earn that title?
By Saturn's stern gaze. That is exactly where we begin. Let's uncover why Saturn is called the Greater Malefic. Welcome back to the 10th episode of Learning Traditional Astrology. I'm Arlo, your guide to mastering the ancient wisdom of the stars, and today we have the whole crew with us. Ella, Clara, Katrina, Cherry, let's hear those introductions.
Thanks, Arlo. As you all know, I come from a modern astrology background, and let's just say, I'm still not convinced about some of the rigid classifications in traditional astrology, but I'm keeping an open mind.
I'm Clara. I've been diving deep into historical texts, and the more I read, the more I see how structured and precise traditional astrology truly is. It's fascinating.
I'm Katrina, and honestly, every session feels like uncovering a lost world. The way traditional astrology weaves together philosophy, astronomy, and symbolism, it's unlike anything I expected.
Hello everyone. I'm Cherry, your robotic assistant, ready to provide historical sources, references, and insights.
Fantastic. Now, today's topic is a big one. Saturn, the Great Malefic. Saturn is the great guardian of the cosmos.
You mean the planet that modern astrology says is all about life lessons, personal growth, and karmic rewards?
Ah, Ella, ever the voice of modern thought. But traditional astrology doesn't dress Saturn up in comforting words. Saturn is cold, distant, and harsh. Its lessons don't come with warm hugs. They come with trials, delays, and the weight of time itself.
Saturn is the furthest planet visible to the naked eye. That must hold some symbolic meaning, right?
Exactly. Saturn marks the boundary between what is known and the great beyond. It represents limits, restrictions, and the edges of reality itself.
So what? Saturn is just cosmic no-entry signs and brick walls?
Not just brick walls, but the very principles that shape and enforce structure. Saturn rules prisons, where freedom is stripped away, and walls and fences that divide space. Even in the human body, it governs the skin, which separates us from the outside world, and the bones, the very framework that holds us together.
That actually makes sense. Without skin and bones, the body wouldn't hold together. Structure is necessary.
Exactly, Katrina. But structure comes at a cost. Saturn's nature is opposite to life-sustaining heat and moisture. Where the sun provides warmth and vitality, Saturn brings cold, dryness, and deprivation. That's why Saturn is the Greater Malefic. It represents all the painful yet inevitable aspects of existence: loss, hardship, isolation, fear, and sorrow.
So, is Saturn always just suffering?
Not necessarily. Saturn's lessons are harsh, but they can lead to mastery, resilience, and wisdom. Whether we crumble under its weight or rise through discipline and patience depends on how we work with its influence.
You also mentioned that Saturn belongs to the diurnal sect. Why is that?
Great question, Clara. The diurnal sect is associated with the sun and daytime, where heat and light help moderate Saturn's excessive coldness. In day charts, Saturn is less malefic, its discipline and structure taking a more constructive role. But in night charts, without the sun's balancing influence, Saturn's cold and harsh nature intensifies, making it more destructive.
Okay, that's actually an interesting distinction. That's something modern astrology doesn't emphasize as much.
That's why traditional astrology is so rich in detail. Now that we understand Saturn's nature, let's move on to its essential dignities and debilities. Let's talk about where Saturn thrives and where it struggles. What signs does Saturn rule?
Saturn's domiciles are Capricorn and Aquarius, but why these two signs specifically?
An excellent question, Clara. Saturn, being the dimmest of the classical planets, has long been associated with the enemy of light. It governs the coldest, harshest time of the year, winter. When the sun moves into Capricorn and Aquarius, the northern hemisphere faces long nights, bitter cold, and lifeless landscapes. It's the season of scarcity, restrictions, and survival. And Saturn? It thrives in these conditions.
That actually makes sense, especially when we think of astrology's roots in a northern hemisphere worldview. Capricorn and Aquarius align with the sun's decline in daylight, reinforcing Saturn's symbolism of limits and hardship.
So Saturn feels most at home when everything is bleak and cold?
Precisely. When the world is stripped of warmth and abundance, structure and endurance become paramount. Saturn rules over discipline, control, and resilience, the qualities needed to endure the long winter months.
Okay, so Saturn loves winter and all things tough, but where does it struggle?
Saturn is in detriment in Cancer and Leo, I assume because they are opposite its domiciles?
Spot on, Clara. Saturn stands in direct opposition to the luminaries, the sun and the moon, the givers of light and life. The sun radiates heat, vitality, and creation, while the moon nurtures growth, change, and emotion. Saturn? It suppresses, restricts, and resists all of that.
So, is Saturn just the villain in the sun and moon's heroic tale? That feels a bit dramatic.
Oh, but Saturn is the great adversary of the lights. When the sun shines its brightest in Leo, Saturn opposes it from the cold, dark depths of Aquarius. And when the moon thrives in Cancer, waxing and waning in cycles of life, Saturn stands opposite in Capricorn, enforcing its unyielding rules and slow decay. These oppositions are not just about signs, they are about cosmic forces in direct conflict.
So in Cancer and Leo, Saturn is in an environment where its nature clashes with the dominant energy of the sign?
Exactly. In Cancer, Saturn's cold detachment clashes with the sign's emotional depth and need for security. In Leo, its restraint and austerity feel stifling in a sign that thrives on warmth, expression, and recognition. In both cases, Saturn struggles. It's like forcing a strict, unyielding ruler into a world that demands flexibility and passion.
All right, I'll give you this. Saturn really does seem like the ultimate outsider, always resisting the natural flow of things.
And yet, it's that resistance that forges the strongest wills. Now, let's dive into the kinds of people Saturn shapes, the ones who build, endure, and govern under its watchful gaze.
All right, Arlo. We've talked about Saturn's cold, rigid nature, but what does it actually mean in a birth chart? What does Valens say?
By Saturn's stern gaze, a great place to start. Cherry, give us the first paragraph from Valens on Saturn.
Certainly, Arlo. Valens states, Saturn makes those born under him petty, malignant, careworn, self-deprecating, solitary, deceitful, secretive in their trickery, strict, downcast, with a hypocritical air, squalid, black-clad, importunate, sad-looking, miserable, with a nautical bent, plying waterside trades.
Wow. So basically, if Saturn is strong in your chart, you're doomed to be a miserable, scheming hermit in ragged clothes?
If poorly placed, Saturn can signify hardship, isolation, even deception. It can indicate a life filled with delays, struggles, and burdens. But
Hold on, Arlo, what exactly do you mean by poorly placed? Are we talking about Saturn being in detriment or fall, or something more specific?
Clara, you're getting ahead of me. Determining a planet's condition is an art in itself. It's not just about its sign, sect, essential dignity, solar phase, and aspects all play a role. We'll be covering that in depth throughout this series.
So it's not just black and white. Saturn isn't always doom and gloom.
But even if it's well placed, doesn't Saturn still bring struggle? It is the greater malefic, after all.
Great point, Katrina. Saturn always represents trials and limitations, but if well placed, those struggles can lead to wisdom, mastery, and achievement. A strong Saturn gives resilience, patience, and the ability to build something that lasts. Cherry, what does Lily say about Saturn in poor condition?
Lily states, when ill, Saturn is envious, covetous, jealous, mistrustful, timorous, sordid, outwardly dissembling, sluggish, suspicious, stubborn, a contemner of women, a close liar, malicious, murmuring, never contented, ever repining.
That's quite the list.
So, in bad condition, Saturn basically turns someone into a miserable, scheming pessimist? Yikes.
In some cases, yes, but don't jump to conclusions. Saturn in a birth chart doesn't always describe the native's personality. It can also represent authority figures, mentors, or even elder siblings. A poorly placed Saturn doesn't mean you're doomed, just that you'll need to work through its challenges more consciously.
That's an important distinction, Arlo. Not everything in the chart is about who we are. It's also about the people and forces shaping our lives.
But what about a well-placed Saturn? What does Valens say?
Ah, now we're getting to the good part. Valens doesn't explicitly say, this is what a strong Saturn looks like, but we can infer it from his second paragraph. Cherry, read that for us.
Valens writes, Saturn makes serfs and farmers because of its rule over the land, and it causes men to be renters of property, tax farmers, and violent in action. It puts into one's hands great ranks and distinguished positions, supervisions, management of others' property, and the fathership of others' children.
So, while a weak Saturn can lead to struggle, a strong Saturn grants authority, discipline, and control over resources?
Exactly. Supervision, management, these are Saturn's strengths. When well placed, Saturn grants the ability to govern, to structure, to endure hardship and emerge stronger.
And what about Saturn's link to the land? Valens mentioned farming and property management.
Excellent observation, Clara. Saturn is also the god of agriculture and time. His scythe reminds us that patience, discipline, and hard work yield results. Farmers understand Saturn's nature well. You plow, sow, and tend the land, but nature's restrictions and uncertainties always loom. A good harvest is never guaranteed, just as Saturn's rewards come only through effort and perseverance.
I like that analogy. Saturn teaches us that discipline is necessary for long-term success.
When I think of Saturn, I think serious, stern, studious.
Perfectly put, Ella. And those traits align with the melancholic temperament, the humor associated with Saturn. People with a strong Saturn tend to be reflective, meticulous, and diligent. They work slowly and steadily toward their goals, often in solitude.
Does Lily describe what a strong Saturn looks like?
Yes. Lily writes, when well dignified, Saturn is profound in imagination, in his acts severe, in words reserved, in speaking and giving very spare, in labor patient, in arguing or disputing grave, in obtaining the goods of this life studious and solicitous, in all manner of actions austere.
Now that sounds like the Saturn one: respect, intelligent, disciplined, and deliberate.
I'm beginning to see why Saturn is feared and respected. There's a depth to its influence that goes beyond just hardship.
Exactly. And now that we understand Saturn's role in shaping individuals, let's take a closer look at the professions it signifies. It's time to talk about the professions under Saturn's domain. And let me tell you, they're not the glamorous kind.
Let me guess. Saturn rules over jobs that involve suffering, isolation, or just general misery.
Ah, Ella, you're catching on. But Saturn doesn't just rule hardship for hardship's sake. It governs those who endure the weight of time, responsibility, and decay. Cherry, give us William Lilly's list of Saturn's people.
Certainly, Arlo. Lilly states, in general, he signifies husbandmen, clowns, beggars, day laborers, old men, fathers, grandfathers, monks, Jesuits, sectarists.
Clowns? Saturn rules clowns? That doesn't sound right.
Not the colorful circus kind, Ella. Think of the fool, the jester, the ones who, despite making people laugh, often live on the fringes of society. Many jesters of old had deep wisdom hidden beneath their antics, a classic Saturnian theme. And let's not forget, comedy often comes from tragedy.
And beggars, day laborers, and the elderly, these are people who have felt the passage of time, dealt with restrictions, or live in harsh conditions. That aligns with Saturn's themes of limitation and endurance.
What about monks? I wouldn't have expected Saturn to rule over religious figures.
Think about it, Katrina. Monks live an ascetic life, disciplined, structured, and often isolated from society. They renounce worldly pleasures, embracing Saturn's themes of restriction and detachment. The Jesuits and sectarists Lily mentions follow strict codes, sacrificing comfort for devotion.
Okay, that makes sense. But does Saturn only rule over those who suffer? What about actual professions?
Good question. Does Lily give a list of Saturnian professions?
Indeed he does. Cherry, read the next passage.
Lily states, couriers, night farmers, miners underground, tinners, potters, broom men, plumbers, brickmakers, malsters, chimney sweepers, sextons of churches, bearers of dead corpses, scavengers, ostlers, colliers, carters, gardeners, ditchers, chandlers, dyers of black cloth, and herdsmen, shepherds, or cow-keepers.
That's a long list, and kind of grim. Miners, gravediggers, chimney sweepers, corpse bearers, Saturn's domain sounds downright bleak.
It makes sense, though. These are people who work under difficult, often dirty conditions. Saturn rules over things that are hidden, buried, or require patience and endurance.
And people who deal with things that others don't want to touch, like waste, death, or hard labor. That actually fits Saturn's reputation as the Greater Malefic.
Exactly. Saturn's professions aren't glamorous, but they are necessary. Without brickmakers, we'd have no buildings. Without miners, no precious metals. Without shepherds and farmers, no food. These are the professions that demand resilience, patience, and the ability to withstand hardship.
So Saturn doesn't just rule suffering, it rules survival.
Now you're getting it. Saturn's work is hard, but it builds the foundations of society. Without Saturnian labor, civilization wouldn't exist.
That actually makes Saturn feel more essential, rather than just restrictive.
And yet, society often overlooks these workers. Just like Saturn, the planet at the edge of the visible cosmos often gets pushed aside in favor of flashier planets.
Exactly, Katrina. Saturn doesn't seek the spotlight. It works in the background, keeping everything running. And now that we understand Saturn's professions, let's move on to its other significations. We've covered Saturn's temperament, professions, and role in a birth chart, but Saturn's reach extends far beyond that. Let's explore the deeper, often overlooked significations of the Greater Malefic.
Let me guess, more gloom and doom?
Ah, Ella, always trying to smooth things out, but you're not entirely wrong. Saturn governs poisons, restrictions, and all things that decay over time. And speaking of poisons, Clara, what metal does Saturn rule?
If we're talking about toxicity, lead comes to mind.
Exactly. Lead is Saturn's metal, heavy, dense, and stable, the traditional metal of tombs. It's toxic to both people and the environment, much like unchecked Saturnian energy can be.
But lead isn't all bad. It was widely used in construction, plumbing, and even paint because of its durability.
Well spotted, Ella. That's the dual nature of Saturn. What is heavy, restrictive, and even dangerous can also be useful when handled wisely.
And what about time? Saturn is known as the Lord of Time, right? Does he rule a specific period?
Good question. Saturn's greater years are 57. In traditional astrology, each planet has assigned time periods used for longevity calculations and timing techniques.
That's interesting. Saturn's greater years are almost half of what's assigned to the luminaries, the Sun and the Moon.
Exactly. Saturn is the planet of limitation, restriction, and endings. Its greater years being relatively short is symbolic. Where the Sun represents vitality and longevity, Saturn opposes life's sustaining forces, reminding us that time is finite.
So Saturn's timekeeping isn't just about measuring years, it's about showing us that everything eventually has an end.
Precisely, Clara. Now, speaking of Saturn's influence on time, let's talk about what day of the week it rules.
That's an easy one. Saturday.
Right again, Katrina. Saturday, or Saturn's Day, is a day of discipline, responsibility, and solitude, a perfect reflection of Saturn's energy.
And what about illnesses? Since Saturn is cold and dry, I assume its associated diseases are linked to deterioration and restriction?
Exactly. Saturnian illnesses stem from coldness, aging, and melancholy. Arthritis, rheumatism, depression, chronic illnesses, colds, chills, flu, bone disorders, and hearing loss all fall under Saturn's domain. Saturn also rules fears, nightmares, and long-term health conditions that weaken the body slowly over time.
That's quite the list.
But it makes sense. Saturn governs what decays, restricts, and ages, so naturally it would be linked to conditions that linger and wear the body down.
Okay, Arlo, I'll admit this is fascinating, but what about herbs? Does Saturn have a plant associated with it?
Ah, now we're getting into the realm of natural magic. Comfrey is one of Saturn's herbs. It thrives in shady, damp places, and its deep, strong roots allow it to grow almost unchecked. It was even called blackwort in ancient times.
And it's been used for healing wounds, particularly for mending broken bones. Makes sense. considering Saturn rules bones. The plant also contains high levels of calcium and phosphorus, the very minerals essential for bone strength.
Exactly, Clara. Saturn may be associated with decay, but it also governs the slow, steady processes of healing and endurance.
Okay, I see the pattern. Saturn takes away, but it also preserves. It weakens, but it also fortifies.
By the blazing constellations, Ella, you're finally seeing Saturn for what he is, the ultimate teacher of patience and endurance.
It's actually kind of poetic. Saturn is about what lasts, whether it's hardship or wisdom gained through experience.
Beautifully said, Katrina. Now, let's take all of this and bring it together. Clara, can you summarize what we've learned today?
Of course, Saturn is the Greater Malefic, excessively cold and dry, associated with a melancholic temperament, pessimistic, reserved, but deeply wise. He represents labor, endurance, and structure, ruling over physical laborers, farmers, monks, and those who work in difficult conditions. Saturn governs restrictions, solitude, and boundaries, symbolized in professions that involve hardship, responsibility, or working with things that decay. Among metals, Saturn rules lead. Among days, he rules Saturday, and his greater years are 57. His illnesses stem from coldness, aging, and melancholy, while his herbal associations, like comfrey, reveal his power over slow healing and resilience.
Well, Arlo, you made Saturn sound both terrifying and respectable at the same time. I'll give you that.
That's Saturn for you.
What's next, Arlo?
We introduced the birth chart of Petrarch in episode 8. Ella, why don't you provide an overview of his life?
Gladly, but when do we start actually delineating his birth chart?
Patience, Ella, patience. Step by step, we're building the foundation first.
Fine. Let's dive into Petrarch's life. Alright everyone, today we're diving into the life of Francesco Petrarca, better known as Petrarch, poet, scholar, and the so-called father of humanism. His contributions to literature and classical scholarship set the foundation for the Renaissance.
By Jupiter's mighty thunder, that's quite the introduction. But tell me, Ella, what makes him so important? We've had poets and scholars before. What sets him apart?
Glad you asked, Arlo. Petrarch wasn't just any poet. He was obsessed with the classics. He rediscovered lost texts from ancient Rome, preserving knowledge that would have otherwise faded into obscurity. Ever heard of Cicero's letters? Well, they might have been lost forever if not for Petrarch's relentless search for classical manuscripts.
His work paved the way for Renaissance humanism, didn't it? He focused on individual experience, critical thinking, and personal growth, ideas that challenged the dominant medieval worldview.
So, he was like a bridge between the old world and the new?
Exactly. Petrarch was born in 1304 in Arezzo, Italy, but his family had been exiled from Florence. His father wanted him to become a lawyer, so he sent young him to study law in Montpellier and later Bologna.
Let me guess, he wasn't exactly thrilled about that career path.
Not in the slightest. He had no interest in law and spent all his time reading classical literature instead. And get this, his father, frustrated with his obsession, burned his collection of books.
Burned his books? That's brutal.
Well, in a way, it worked. It forced him to focus, but didn't his father leave him a few books after seeing his devastation?
Yes, Cicero and Virgil were spared, and those books became his lifelong companions. He read and reread them so much that their words practically became part of his own thoughts.
By Saturn's stern gaze, a man who treated books like sacred relics, I like him already.
It didn't take long for him to abandon his legal studies completely. After his father died, he gave up law and fully embraced his passion for classical learning.
But what about his poetry? He's famous for love poetry, right?
Yes, in 1327, he met a woman named Laura in Avignon, and she became the muse for his most famous work, Il Canzoniere, or the Songbook. He poured his emotions into these 366 poems, capturing love, longing, and deep introspection.
But Laura was already married, wasn't she?
That's right. His love was unrequited, which made his poetry even more poignant. And unlike many of his other works, which were in Latin, Il Canzoniere was written in Italian, shaping the modern Italian language.
Ah, the suffering poet trope, Saturn would approve.
He did suffer plenty, but beyond poetry, Petrarch was an insatiable scholar. In the 1330s, he traveled across Europe, hunting down ancient texts. He found a rare copy of Cicero's Proarchia in Liège, and in 1345, he made his greatest discovery, Cicero's lost letters in Verona.
That must have been a huge deal. Preserving lost knowledge, reconnecting with the past. It's like he was reviving a lost civilization.
Exactly. That discovery is considered one of the key moments that ignited the Renaissance.
And wasn't he crowned poet laureate in 1341? That was a significant honor in Rome, reaffirming his status as a literary giant.
Yes, he was crowned in the audience hall of the Senatorial Palace on April 8, 1341, becoming the first poet laureate since antiquity. It was a moment of triumph for classical scholarship.
By Mercury's swift wings, a poet honored like a king. That's a legacy worthy of Saturn's endurance.
But despite his public success, he struggled internally. He was torn between worldly ambition and spiritual introspection. His brother Gherardo became a monk in 1343, which only deepened his crisis. This inner turmoil led him to write The Secret, a philosophical dialogue where he debated his own flaws and desires with Saint Augustine and Lady Truth.
A man questioning himself, trying to reconcile ambition with inner peace. That's very Saturnian, isn't it?
I see you're getting into the traditional astrology mindset, Katrina. Yes, it's a very Saturnian struggle. Ambition versus solitude, intellect versus emotional depth.
And then came the Black Death. He lost many friends, and even Laura, during the plague years of 1347 to 1351. It was a devastating time for him. His writings from this period reflect deep sorrow. But he turned to philosophy, writing De Remediis Utriusque Fortunae, a work on dealing with both good and bad fortune through a Stoic approach.
Saturn strikes again, teaching through hardship.
But he found a friend in Giovanni Boccaccio, another famous writer. Their friendship fueled the humanist movement. They sought lost manuscripts, studied the classics, and championed the revival of Roman philosophy.
And how did his life end?
He moved frequently: Milan, Venice, and finally, Padua. Even in his later years, he kept writing, compiling his letters and continuing Il Canzoniere. He passed away on July 19, 1374, with a quill in hand, still immersed in his work.
A true scholar to the very end, by the blazing constellations. What a life! Poetic passion, intellectual hunger, personal struggles. It's like a grand epic in itself.
And he left behind more than just poetry. He shaped the very essence of Renaissance thought.
I wasn't expecting him to be so much more than just a poet. He was a relentless seeker of knowledge, piecing together the wisdom of the past to shape the future, a true bridge between ancient Rome and the modern world.
That's why we're studying him. His life is filled with so many Saturnian themes: persistence, discipline, hardship, and ultimately, legacy.
Fantastic! The reason we're exploring figures like Petrarch and Charles Dickens is to prepare for our deep dive into their birth charts. And trust me, I'm open to analyzing even more nativities. Traditional astrology is rich and colorful, and the best way to appreciate it is by seeing how it plays out in real lives.
Great plan, Arlo. Your ambition is as grand as ever. I appreciate it.
If you've enjoyed this deep dive, let us know what sign your Saturn is in down in the comments, and we'll analyze it for you.
And of course, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts. Keep learning, keep exploring, and we'll see you next time.
Bye.
Transmission complete. See you next time.